when I heard that this man was available to chat because he's got his memoir out, I said, absolutely. A legend in the world of journalism. And at this point is when I take my my graduate degree from the Medill School of Journalism of Northwestern. I take that out and I say, this is what I've got going on for my bona fides to interview this man. Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom, where all books are sold. Carl Bernstein here on the Rich Eisen Show. How are you, sir?
I'm good. It's good to be with you. You were talking there about Larry O'Brien. I never knew him. He was, aside from being the commissioner of basketball, he was, at the time of the Watergate break-in, he was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and the burglars were trying to find out things that Larry O'Brien knew.
And that had nothing to do with Wilt Chamberlain at the time or anything like that, right, Carl?
In fact, no, and the burglars were short.
So, honestly, I bring that up all the time, and people can't believe that there is a Watergate connection to the trophy that the NBA champions lift every single year. But so, did you ever interview the Larry O'Brien when he was the DNC? Did you ever knock on his door when you and Woodward?
Yeah, I talked to him a good number of times. Both in his capacity as chairman of the Democratic National Committee and as the intended person who the burglars wanted to hear what he was saying, and as well as other people. But he was one of the objects of the burglary. But the other thing, I was just thinking about being on this show and about, the book called Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom. It's about growing up an apprenticeship in this great newsroom at the Washington Evening Star between 60 and 65. And one of the things I got to do was to get to know the great sports writers of the day. Bob Addy, Shirley Povich, Red Smith. It was an amazing time of sports writing.
Carl Bernstein here on the Rich Eisen Show. So this book focuses on you growing up. What led you to the career that you wound up having, Carl? What about that?
Well, I'm a second generation native Washingtonian, and when I was a junior in high school, I had 1 foot in the classroom, 1 foot in the juvenile court, one foot in the pool hall. It's 3 feet, but the one in the foot that was in the classroom was about 2 inches in. And my father rightly feared for my future. And he knew somebody at the Washington Evening Star, the great afternoon newspaper in Washington, the opposition paper to the Washington Post, and at that time a better paper than the Washington Post. And my father knew I had taken a journalism class in the 10th grade, and that I had some ability to write. I could pass essay exams while failing everything else. And he got me an interview for a job as a copy boy. And I had never seen the inside of a newsroom. And when I went for the interview, the person who interviewed me, the production editor of the paper, took me into the newsroom. And I had never seen such a sight in my life. And to this day, it's probably the most stunning thing I've ever encountered. There was noise, people yelling copy, clatter of typewriters. You could hear the rumble of the presses underneath. A copy boy came by with a wagon full of the fifth edition of the newspaper that day, and the production editor handed me one copy, and it was still warm from the presses. And watching this spectacle, it was as if these people were on the most urgent errands in the nation. I knew in that instant that I wanted to be a newspaper man. And though I was much younger than pretty much everybody there, the other copy boys were 20, 21, I went to work there. I got hired because I had taken typing with the girls and could type 90 words a minute. And I then got the greatest seat in the country at an amazing time in America and in the nation's capital.
Carl Bernstein, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the author of his new memoir, Chasing History, A Kid in the Newsroom. When did you realize the Watergate story was something different? When did you realize that, Carl?
I think both Bob Woodward and myself realized that even the first day after the break-in. Bob was at the courthouse covering the arraignment of the burglars, and one of them said he worked for the CIA, and Bob said, holy shit, which is, you can see that scene
Right.
in the movie of All the President's Men. We're reading the book. Meanwhile, I was in the office and I started calling the homes and wives of the Watergate burglars who were from Florida. Most of them were Cuban Americans. And some of the wives started telling me about their husbands' CIA connections. So initially, our feeling was that this break-in and burglary with 5 men arrested wearing rubber gloves and business suits and sequential $100 bills in their pockets, that this might go to the CIA somehow, not to the Nixon White House. But within a few days, it became evident to us that somehow this pointed toward the Nixon White House and the re-election committee.
Well, at some point, people have obviously seen the film and have read the book, but at some point, was there a breaking point where you felt that this could ruin your career, if not also break a story, that you were on thin ice on this front?
Yes, we made a mistake. And, people ask all the time, were we afraid for our lives? And there were some moments when we got some threats that weren't quite so veiled. But really, what were we afraid of? We were afraid of making a mistake, because the future of the paper, if we made a bad mistake, that the paper itself could suffer grievously and maybe irretrievably, because the White House had made our conduct, Woodward, myself, Ben Bradley, the great editor of the Washington Post, they made our conduct in Watergate the issue instead of the conduct of the president and his men. And we made a mistake. It turned out it was a mistake of attribution. We had said that somebody had testified a set of facts before the grand jury, when in fact the person had not testified to those facts before the grand jury. The facts that we reported were right, but that little sliver there about the grand jury was wrong. And on that day, the White House pounced on us once again, because they realized that we had made a real mistake. The only one we made is, I think, in 2 years of covering the Watergate story. But we were afraid we were going to have to quit the paper. But quickly we found out what the mistake was, said in the paper what it was, that it was an error of attribution, not of substance, that indeed it was about a secret fund that had paid for the bugging at Watergate and other undercover activities by the Nixon White House. And the substance of it was correct, and we moved on from there.
If there was a cable network back in 1970, Carl, that would be able to give out Nixon talking points and why something like this was okay, do you think you would have been able to do your reporting and Nixon would be out? Do you think that would happen?
Yeah, I think we would have been able to do the reporting. Look, I think this is what's interesting about my book, Chasing History, The Kid in the Newsroom, because everything I know about reporting, about journalism, I really learned at this apprenticeship that I had at the greatest afternoon paper in America. And the essence of what I learned is what you see in Watergate, what you see in All the President's Men, the kind of reporting we did. You don't get the stories by sitting in the office. You go out, you knock on people's doors, you go to source after source after source. You try to nail down not just a set of disparate facts, but context. And context is, Woodward and I use the phrase, and we've used it for 50 years now. We're the best of friends. We talk a couple times a week. And the phrase we started using was the best obtainable version of the truth. And it's a variation of what I had learned at the Star. And that there we called it the complexity of the truth. And this is not a simple business. The simple part is the exercise, is the perseverance, is the going nonstop to get the story. But the hard part is really putting all together what it means. And, there's a line in this book, and I learned this covering civil rights, because the Washington that I grew up in was a Jim Crow town. I went to segregated public schools legally segregated in the capital of the United States. And a lot of my time at the Star bracketed the Civil War by exactly 100 years later. But what I learned, especially covering civil rights, was the truth is not neutral. The best obtainable version of the truth is not about neutrality. It's not about putting 50% of the story on one side and 50% on the other. When you get to the best obtainable version of the truth, you're deciding what is news. And so let's take your veiled example there when you were talking about a certain kind of network or whatever. It's not the best obtainable version of the truth, what you see on Fox. It's ideologically driven. It's totally one-sided. It's not neutral, but it's also not news because they haven't done the work of the reporting. They have no interest in reporting. So you can see a straight line from what's in this book, this kid with the best seat in the country, covering civil rights, covering Jack Kennedy's inauguration. In my first days at the paper, city editor said, go to the inaugural parade and go to 4th and Pennsylvania Avenue, cover the crowd, call in what you see. Don't be fancy about it. Don't try to write anything. Give it to a rewrite man. I had this amazing opportunity. Who could imagine a 16-year-old kid? And then I covered Kennedy's press conferences, or I went to them. I covered his assassination. I covered civil rights. I covered plane crashes, terrible events. And so it's all about this apprenticeship. So by the time of Watergate, and Woodward likes to tell the story because he was new in the business at the time, but I'd never seen a reporter quite like Woodward in his instincts and his drive. But at the same time, as Woodward said, hey, he'd had this experience of 12 years experience at the time of Watergate. We were 28 and 29 years old, but I had 12 years experience. And so the methodology that we used in Watergate is really what you see in this book about my apprenticeship at the Star, which was a better paper than the Washington Post was at the time I was there.
Carl Bernstein, Chasing History, a kid in the newsroom. But, you know, there are more than just one network and different sides, if you will, of the divide, and that's where there is right now in this country, that do the other side, if you will, says this is a slanted opinion because of their way of doing it, and they're both news and so on and so forth. So my question for you is, how do you view the current state of political, if not investigative journalism within that beltway, Carl Bernstein?
Well, two aspects to the question. The first is, well, what is going on in the country? Well, I think you probably heard me on the air saying for a number of years we're in a cold civil war in this country. But then that cold civil war was ignited by Trump. So we're now in past the point of ignition in this country in terms of its division, in terms of the viciousness of the anger. But what about the reporting? What about the investigative reporting that you've cited? I would say that the reporting and the investigative reporting on the Trump presidency is probably the greatest reporting by the largest number of news organizations covering the presidency of my lifetime. Almost everything, and that includes books as well, including Bob Woodward's book, including all kinds of work by reporters for news organizations, including some that are considered to be the left and some are considered to be a little to the right, because the criminality and actually now we know we had a seditious president of the United States. Sedition meaning someone who actually incites insurrection. So I think that almost everything we know about the Trump presidency, it doesn't come from people in the Trump administration telling us what really happened. It hasn't come from the Congress of the United States until very recently. We're seeing some things through investigation. What we know about the Trump presidency, we really know from great reporting. You know, at the time of Watergate, we were out, Woodward and myself, the Washington Post, we were out on a limb by ourselves for a number of months, and people didn't believe what we were writing in the paper through our own investigative investigative reporting for months and months and months. In the Trump presidency, what these investigative reporters and people covering the White House have put into their reports on the air, in their newspapers, in their news organizations online, is the best obtainable version of the truth, and it's a remarkable, remarkable achievement.
All right, let me finish with a piece of cotton candy then.
Cotton candy is good.
Okay, here we go. I am looking in the index of your book, and I didn't see it either. There's no Dustin Hoffman in here.
No.
So, did you talk with him about his portrayal, or were you part of it in any way, shape, or form for the film?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
What was that like?
Let me tell you about it. The first thing is this book, and it's told in the voice, Chasing History of Kid in the Newsroom. It's told in the voice of Kid, not the old man looking back.
Love it.
But when Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford came to play Woodward and me, they lived with us for like 6 months. I mean, they didn't come back to our houses at night, but every day they spent with us practically. Dustin, he came to the Passover Seder at home. We would walk around the city together. We really got to know each other well. And Redford and Hoffman would ask us question after question after question. How did you do this? What would your exact words be to each other? And the great director of the movie, Alan Pakula, followed what we had said. The only reason we were willing to sell the rights to the Book of All the President's Men is if indeed a movie director and a producer was willing to stick to the absolute truth of what that book was and not fictionalize it. And that's indeed what Alan Pakula, the great director, did. That's what Redford did. That's what Hoffman did. And one of the extraordinary things about All the President's Men, and again, there's a straight line from this Chasing History book to All the President's Men and the Watergate coverage, is that the movie and the book, the movie especially of All the President's Men, it's not about Woodward and me and our personal lives. There's no love story in it. You don't see any girlfriends. It's about the process of reporting and what a news organization does. And it's, again, one of the things today in our journalism, there's an awful lot, too much going to Google, not getting out of the newsroom and thinking, I can go to Google and learn all about what's online and learn people's biographies and everything about it, if Google and Wikipedia are right, and they're not always right. That Google and the Internet are fabulous reporting tools, but they're no substitute for what you see in that movie of All the President's Men or what you read in Chasing History. It's all about going out and meeting people and respecting the people you're covering, even if they're lying to you. Usually people tell you what is their truth. It might not be the truth, but it's your responsibility to then go to other sources and find out, is what they think is their truth really the truth? And there's shades of gray all through this. That's what All the President's Men, the movie, is about. That's what Chasing History, the book, is. So it's really almost a prequel to All the President's Men, because you see this 16-year-old kid, this 17-year-old, 18, 19, learning and getting these opportunities that you could not even imagine today. The first week that I was at the paper, it's right before John Kennedy was elected, running against Richard Nixon, I was asked by the head copy boy asked. I was told, go to Burning Tree Country Club. We've got a photographer out there taking pictures of President Eisenhower on the golf course. And I want you to bring back to the office his rolls of film. So I went out to Burning Tree Country Club, and I had a little identification card from the Washington Star, and I showed it to the chief caddy, and he took me right to this putting green. And 12 feet away from me was just one Secret Service man nearby, was the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, sinking putts. And I was mesmerized. I looked at his hands, and I could see that, that he had brown spots on his hands. And I made a little note in my notebook, and the photographer took the film out of his camera and gave it to me, and I left. And it was the first time I had ever seen a president of the United States. But imagine that at age 16. And a few weeks later, a week before the election, Jack Kennedy came to my high school in Silver Spring, Maryland. And the state editor said to me, well, Bernstein, we've got our top political reporter covering this event because the election is going to be very close between Kennedy and Nixon, and Maryland could even decide the election. So our top political reporter is going to come to your high school, but why don't you go stay on the grounds and, again, cover the crowd? And the grounds there, and the community. And 12,000 people showed up for this rally. And so even in the first few weeks of my apprenticeship at the Washington Star, and you can imagine some of my classmates looking bug-eyed at me as I'm sitting there with a reporter's notebook and running behind the candidate for president of the United States. I mean, what a thing to be able to do. And looking back at it, it's this amazing life that that I've been lucky enough to have, but still, this occurring at that age is I'm kind of agape myself at the opportunity and what happened in those years from age 16 to 21.
Well, congrats on the book, Chasing History, a Kid in the Newsroom. Greatly appreciate this chat. Love to have you on again, Carl Bernstein, and thank you for all your work. Thank you very much.
You.
Appreciate it. That's Carl Bernstein, everybody. Check out his book. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.